Pod Apostle. Help us build the kingdom. Like, share, and subscribe. Hello and good day from beautiful Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. Praised be Jesus Christ, always be praised, and Hail Mary. Happy to be talking to you from our YouTube channel and Radio Maria. And, doing our best to make some of the fundamental teachings of the church clear and available, and also to offer a word of encouragement. I think about my anniversary of my ordination on June 11th and St. Barnabas, who was an encourager. So I hope the words that we talk about today are encouraging, even though they might be a little bit challenging at times. When Pope Francis became the Pope, shortly after he was made Pope, he said something that I remember, I hate to say disappointed me, but the fact of the matter is it did disappoint me. That's just honest, okay? And he said this. He said that the church is obsessed with abortion, same-sex marriage, and contraception, and that we have to get over that obsession. And I thought to myself, what is he talking about? How many people, and you can answer for yourself now, how many of you all have heard a homily or a clear doctrinal statement from your pulpit about contraception? How many have had a formation and an understanding of the church's position about a marriage and the openness to life within marriage? How many of you have heard a homily about the nature of marriage, the complementarity of male and female, St. Paul's teaching about same-sex unions? It's very clear in Romans 1, maybe not unions, but just that whole idea. And the answer, I would bet, is for many of you all, you haven't heard any, or if you have heard it, it's been very rare, or newly given by a priest that's been ordained in the last few years. So my brothers and sisters, we're obsessed with, I think what we should be obsessed with is defending the truth. And the reality is, I think Pope Francis's position that he took when he said that was that it was in the news a lot. The Catholic Church is against this. The Catholic Church is against that. The Catholic Church is against the next thing. Well, that is the media framing the conversation. And I'm afraid that Pope Francis, who also described himself as naive, was being a little naive, because that conversation should be framed in this way. Sex is sacred. Sex is holy. Sex is covenantal. Sex is sacramental. While Jesus dying on the cross was not a sexual act, it was an act of self-donation, of giving one's body in a sacrificial way. And a very near analogy to what Jesus did on the cross was the gift of a married spouse to his or her spouse in the covenant of marriage. So why am I launching off on this subject today? Because it's on my mind for a variety of reasons. One of the great privileges of my life as a priest is to prepare couples for marriage. And when I was in the seminary, I wasn't sure that I would think this would be a great privileged opportunity to walk with people in this way. But it has turned out to be a great and I think profound part of my being a pastor, is that you get to pastor a young couple in this place in their life and help them kind of come to a better understanding of the church, of their faith, of an understanding of the sexual bond, because we have done a poor job as a culture, and to some degree, I would have to blame the church also. We have done a poor job as a church and as a culture explaining to people, teaching people, and modeling what a healthy perspective on sex is. And so there's a question. There's a questionnaire that is given to couples as they begin preparing for marriage. And one of the questions is, It's actually a statement in this case. The statement is, I received a healthy perspective on sex from my family. And so, how do you answer that question? Yes, I received a healthy perspective. No, I did not receive a healthy perspective. Or I'm not sure, how to answer that. Well, I would say that more than half, most of the people that respond say, I did not receive a healthy perspective on sex from my family. And why? What would be the reason? In some cases it would simply be neglect, that they did not receive any perspective on sex from their families. It was left up to Hollywood or the internet or magazines or television shows or whatever it might be, or the kids in the locker room or whatever. Whoever, their perspective on sex was shaped by something other than their family. So that's a way. Or another idea is that a family may have shaped their children in an understanding of sexuality, or their young adults, and it may have just been simply saying no, with no backup, no kind of understanding of the powers that are at work, both the spiritual power and frankly the evil powers that are at work around human sexuality. Other families may have treated it too casually. There may have been some abuse or trauma in families, far too common. Some were maybe just given the birds and the bees, but nothing about sexuality or theology and sexuality. So, let me ask you now to think about this question. And I know some of you are well past remembering as a 20 something or as a teenager what was the perspective that my family gave me. But, what perspective, and did you receive a healthy perspective? And let me ask you, especially the more mature people that might be listening to this, please hear this, that it is your responsibility as a grandparent or a parent to help shape the perspective of sex that couples that are going to come to me in not too distant future, they're going to have, or their priest or their pastor, whoever it may be, to have a proper and healthy perspective on sex. Now, let's back up for a second. And I want to say that, sex is sacred, sex is holy, sex is of God, sex is part of the first commandment that God gave, the first blessing that God gave to Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply. Right there, the sexual union is being blessed and being given a purpose, if you will. But because the sexual union is sacred, because it is life giving, because it is foundational, listen now, foundational to a healthy, holy, and life giving marriage, sex is one of those places around which there is a tremendous spiritual battle. And so the culture and the media that attacks Jesus, that attacks the church, and again, I can't say the church is attacked about these things without saying, oh, yes, the church is being attacked from within by evil priests and neglectful priests and evil bishops and neglectful bishops. Because if you don't say that, then, I'm afraid I'll lose my credibility. This spiritual battle goes on outside of the church and inside of the church. And one of the places the battle is being fought is over the sacredness of this body, and how that sacredness is expressed through our actions in the liturgy and through our actions and how we treat our neighbor, the marginalized, the poor, and of course, how we treat our spouses in the most intimate way and in the daily way. So this body is sacred, and the spiritual battle that takes place around it. So God's original plan, he created male and female. The sexual difference is not accidental. It belongs to the image of God. In the image of God, he made them. Male and female, he made them. And when Eve is created and Adam looks upon Eve, what does he do? He looks at her with wonder. He looks at her with awe. He looks at her happily with purity. He looks at her with gratitude. And then the two shall become one flesh. This first, again, biblical description of the sexual union and this marriage that they have, and then the sex that is part of their marriage. They were naked, the Bible says, without shame. What does that mean? They weren't hiding from each other. They were not exploiting each other. They were not afraid of each other. There was a perfect trust, a perfect love, perfect capacity to give of oneself. And then what happened? And then sin entered the world. And one of the first things, the first results of sin was that they needed to put clothes on themselves, because now the relationship between the male and female was distorted by a selfishness, distorted by an objectification, distorted by dominance, distorted by lust, and all of those things. Again, all the consequences of sin. And now, one of the things that the world has reduced itself to is to tell us that, no, there's no sexual sin. What are you talking about? That's crazy. This is the voice of the culture again. There's no sexual sin. Your body is not that important. You're just you're just another step up the evolutionary chain, those kind of things. Ultimately, sex isn't sacred. Sex isn't special necessarily. Sex is meaningless. And that message has been driven into young people and old to the point where they have believed it. And again, this is a theme that I have been revisited a few times. Now there is a rebellion against that meaninglessness. And now I want to give young couples, I want to give medium-aged couples, I want to give single people, I want to give young men who are thinking about the priesthood share a little bit of this healthy perspective that our body is a sacred vessel given to us for worship, given to us for sacrifice, given to us for the ministry and the mission that God has given to us. And our bodies have tremendous meaning, and the sexual union has tremendous meaning. And so let's go back to marriage for a second. So I like to tell the young couples that I have the privilege of preparing for marriage, or remind them, or maybe this is something that most don't know, I would guess most don't know, that when they come before the altar in the church, it is not the priest that bestows the sacrament on them. The bride and the groom are the ministers of the sacrament. And so when the husband says, I, Matthew, take you, Mary, to be my wife. And then Mary says, I, Mary, take you, Matthew, to be my husband. Those words are the words of the consecration, if you will, the words of the consent that make the marriage happen. And so the priest or the deacon that's there officiating is actually simply being a witness to the husband and the wife making those vows. And when those vows are made, I like to say they're halfway married. They're not all the way married, because then they have to consummate. The word consummate literally means to finish. And how do they finish the marriage ceremony? They do it through the marital embrace. So what is the healthy perspective on sex? Sex is sacred. It is covenantal. It is sacramental. It is a blessing and a command given by God. It is making a sacrifice of your body to the spouse. So again, the marital embrace is an act of self-giving, an act of sacrifice. It also, of course, is mutually helpful and beneficial to both parties there, and joyful, and a gift, and all of those things. But all of those things can be distorted when it loses that healthy perspective, when it loses the health and the goodness and the sacredness and the holiness that God intended for it. And that, again, is all too common in the world today. In some cases, because people simply have not been told. In some cases, because people have rejected what they have been told. In some cases, because there's just such a radical deformation of our understanding of our body and our understanding of our sexuality, that it doesn't even enter into one's mind that this is of God, that this is part of how male and female were supposed to image God in his creative power, in his gift of self. all of those things part of that healthy perspective. It is something beautiful. It is something sacramental. Just as in all of the sacraments, there's oil or water or bread or wine or human words. In marriage, the instrument of the sacrament is the bodies of the spouses themselves. And so, it cannot be overstated why the church is not obsessed with sex. The church is a good steward of this beautiful gift which has been entrusted to her, that in the last 100 years of Western culture has been so radically rejected, beginning, as I have mentioned to people before, beginning with kind of an embrace of contraception that has turned into turning away from this healthy perspective on marriage and sex. Now, I alluded to the Eucharist a few minutes ago. The Eucharist and marriage are both sacraments and sacrifices. And so marriage and how we understand marriage helps us understand the Holy Eucharist. How we understand the priesthood helps us understand the Holy Eucharist. How we understand the whole notion of sacrificing one's body for the gift of another helps us understand the cross. So the cross and marriage and the priesthood and the Eucharist are all related in the mind of the church. Now, back to this sexual union. What about a healthy perspective on sex? Sex, by its very nature, is unitive. That means it brings a couple together. It brings two people together in a way that should be unique. This would be ideal. The ideal circumstance would be that one man who had never had sex and one woman who never had sex would marry each other, and they would be united in that sexual bond in a way that is unique and the way that is permanent, okay? And so the unity of those two joined together by this great gift from God, okay? It's unitive. Sex is uniting, and it also is procreative. And what does that mean? That means it brings forth new life. And these two things, again, I hope you understand. I hope I'm making myself clear that these things are sacred. And because they are sacred, that's where Satan attacks. And as he attacks the unity of husband and wife, this happens through adultery, this happens through fornication, this happens through pornography, this happens through all manner of different sexual sins that are very, very common in the world today. And then when we have the life-giving dimension of it, the most heinous, attack against the life-giving dimension of this beautiful gift of human sexuality is abortion. But contraception also works against this life-giving act. I saw a very, very brief clip this morning of a young man who's 30 years old, and he was saying that I think he was in England or in Britain somewhere. He says none of his friends, not a single one of his friends, and you would imagine he has a relatively large friend group, at least of acquaintances, and since not a single one of them have children, none. And then he started talking about the immense pressure on modern young people that would cause them to be in a situation where they don't want to have children. And I think, well, part of it is the immense pressure, but part of it is just a kind of complete misunderstanding of the whole nature of the sexual union and being made in the image and likeness of God and the sacramental dimension as well. So what is a proper and healthy perspective on sex? It is that from the beginning, that God created us male and female, that the body matters, that Christianity is not against body, that God became flesh, that God took a body, that Jesus gave that body in sacrifice, that act of self-gift that Jesus gave was life-giving, and that this is an analogy to the human gift of sexuality. The theology of the body that John Paul II gave. And frankly, and I just want to be very candid about this, John Paul II wrote this seminal work. He gave these series of talks, and I began to see how the seeds of that talk were beginning to be sown into Catholicism in general. And I'm afraid we had a 10 or 15-year period where there was nothing from the leadership of the church talking about the theology of the body. But the gift of the theology of the body is still present with us in the church. It has just unfortunately been kind of neglected of late. God willing, it will come back. The theology body teaches that the body reveals the person, that our body speaks, that the body itself has a language. And what language is the language of sex? And the language of the church of sex is this: I give myself completely and wholly and individually to you. That I give myself to you with no barriers, with no questions, with no stipulations, rather a complete and total and fruitful gift of self. And that exchange. This is the theology body. St. John Paul II also talked about the fact that we communicate with our body. And in a sense, communication, you just hear the word to commune, to be united. Okay, we commune with our bodies. We speak with our bodies. We talk to one another with our bodies. But there is also a language of marriage that is, God willing, unique to the marriage bond, and that is the communion of persons in the sexual act. And so, believe it or not, we would say that sex is on this spectrum of communication. It's a way of communicating. And how is it that we get to know people? How is it that we are intimate with people? How is it that we understand people? We communicate with them. We literally exchange our ideas and time and that kind of stuff. Well, there is this kind of order of intimacy and communication. And what is at the very, very top of that order of communication? And that is the sexual embrace. So that healthy perspective on sex: sacred, holy, life-giving, individual, reserved, gift given to the spouse in the covenant of marriage, intimate communication, exclusive communication. And so we can speak with our bodies in a way that is healthy and uplifting. And then one can tell a lie with their body. How do you tell a lie with your body? Well, fornication is a lie against what God intended for the body to be, and that is that unique gift given in marriage to the spouse. Contraception is a lie against the sexual union as God has given it to us, and there are other ways. So the church would say, again, getting back to what is the healthy perspective that I would love for the young people that are around here to have, is that pornography is a sin against the unity, or a sin against the gift of sex that God has given to us. That contraception is a sin against the gift of sex that God has given to humanity. That same-sex unions, same-sex sex, if you will, are a sin against God's intended plan of marriage. That our body is a temple, that is a temple of the Holy Spirit. It's not a toy, it's not a commodity, it's not an entertainment. It is truly a temple of the Holy Spirit. And that if this perspective would sink into how we see ourselves and how we understand ourselves, I think our sense of self-esteem, that sense of giftedness and sacredness would rise. Unfortunately, we live in this world where so many people have such a unhealthy or incomplete understanding of sexuality. So I'm going to recommend, there was a book out a few years ago, and I know it's perhaps not perfect, but it was written by Christopher West, Good News About Sex and Marriage. good news about sex and marriage. Also, studying John Paul II's theology of the body helps one get a healthy perspective. We're doing here, I have a couple Catholic schools here nearby. They have been engaging in the theology of the body to some degree over these years. And so there is this, God willing, we don't have an obsession with abortion, same sex marriage, and contraception. Rather, we have a responsibility to joyfully and clearly teach why your body is sacred, why sex is sacred, why sex matters, and why Satan attacks in this place. And, we want healthy marriages. We want holy marriages. We want young couples that understand and respect the complexity and the beauty and the challenges that come with living in a fallen world and trying to transcend that fallen world by having a marriage that is holy and pure and life-giving with a proper understanding of the great gift of of sexuality that God has entrusted to all of us. In my case as a priest, I give my body in union with Christ on the cross during the Mass and in service to the community. And young people or single people also reserve their body in a way that is like a precious gift to be given. So my prayer for you all and for myself is that to have a proper and healthy perspective on sex. So pray for your kids, your grandkids, for yourself, and for healthy and holy marriages. Praise be Jesus Christ. Always be praised, and Hail Mary.
I think that was good.